2:17 a.m. While the rest of the world debates politics and prices, Memphis is sleeping. The city is a silent engine of global commerce. On the tarmac of the world's second busiest cargo hub, massive jet engines whine, ready to ferry the lifeblood of the American economy to every corner of the planet. Above the dark, swirling currents of the Mississippi River, the amber lights of the Hernando de Soto Bridge cast long, shimmering reflections. In the historic districts, families are tucked away inside century-old brick homes, protected by nothing more than the illusion of a solid earth. But 15 kilometers beneath the pavement, the earth is done being silent. It doesn't start with an explosion. It starts with a shiver. In an instant, a jagged, ancient scar, the Reelfoot Rift, decides to exhale 500 million years of pent-up tension. At first, it's just a vibration that wakes the dogs. 5 seconds later, the world stops being solid. The ground doesn't just shake, it undulates. Those beautiful, historic brick walls, they don't flex, they shatter. The interstate bridges, the lifelines of the nation, they begin to sway with a violent, sickening rhythm. They were never designed to survive. Underground, high-pressure gas mains the invisible veins of the city are twisted by soil that has suddenly turned into quicksand. Across the city, the lights don't just flicker, they vanish. In these first few seconds, there is no news report. There is no social media post. There is only a terrifying realization for 10 million people. The ground has betrayed them. The sirens will come later. The federal models will be proven right later. But right now, in the pitch black of a Missouri night, the most dangerous fault in America has just reminded the world that it is still here. And the most chilling part? This isn't California. This is the heart of the country. A place where earthquake was a word for history books until tonight. The silence was so long, we mistook it for safety. We were wrong. We have been conditioned to look west. In the American cultural memory, the word earthquake is synonymous with the Pacific coast. We picture the jagged line of the San Andreas Fault. We remember the 1906 disaster that leveled San Francisco. We see Hollywood's dramatized visions of the Big One dropping California into the ocean. This narrative is so deeply embedded that for most Americans, the idea of a catastrophic seismic event in Missouri or Tennessee feels like science fiction. But there is a dangerous difference between a noisy threat and a silent one. California is a geologically active, fractured landscape. Its faults are loud. They move constantly. They are measured in millimeters every year, and they are embedded in the state's building codes and insurance premiums. The new Madrid Seismic Zone, stretching across the borders of 5 states, is different. It is a ghost in the machine. Because it doesn't manifest as a visible scar on the surface, and because its major events are measured in centuries rather than decades, we have committed the ultimate sin of risk management. We have mistaken its silence for an absence of power. Federal modeling from FEMA and the USGS tells a story that the evening news doesn't. Under the right conditions, the new Madrid fault is capable of producing energy that would make the San Andreas look localized. And to understand why, we have to travel back to a winter that the history books have almost forgotten. On the night of the 16th of December, 1811, the frontier was shattered. It wasn't a single jolt. It was the beginning of a months-long campaign of geological violence. Contemporary accounts from the few settlers in the region described a world that had suddenly turned liquid. The ground didn't just shake. It undulated in visible waves, like a disturbed lake. As the magnitude 7.5 to 8 shocks hammered the crust, a phenomenon called liquefaction occurred on a scale never before seen by Western eyes. Water-saturated soil lost its structure, erupting into sand blows, geysers of black mud and sulfurous gas that turned the forest floor into a swamp. Then, the river did the impossible. During the Great Shock of the 7th of February, 1812, the massive uplift of the riverbed created a temporary natural dam. Eyewitnesses stood in terror as the Mississippi River, the most powerful artery on the continent, began to flow backward for hours. Islands that had been mapped for decades simply vanished. Entire forests were swallowed by the earth. In northwestern Tennessee, the ground subsided so dramatically that the river flooded the depression, creating Reelfoot Lake in a single afternoon. To this day, if you take a boat onto Reelfoot, you are floating over the drowned ghosts of cypress trees, a permanent, physical monument to the power of a fault that doesn't exist in our modern imagination. Here is the data point that should stop you cold. The 1,812 New Madrid sequence was felt over an area 40 times larger than the 1,906 San Francisco earthquake. Why? Because the eastern United States sits on what geologists call a craton, an ancient, cold, and incredibly rigid section of the Earth's crust. Think of California as a pile of loose bricks. A vibration at one end gets absorbed and scattered quickly. But the Midwest? The Midwest is a tuning fork. When New Madrid strikes, the rigid crust transmits that energy with terrifying efficiency. In 1812, church bells rang in Boston, 1,000 miles away. Sidewalks cracked in Washington, D.C. In 1812, this was a scientific curiosity because the frontier was empty. There were no power grids, no gas lines, no 1.4 million people in Memphis, no FedEx hub. The fault hasn't changed since then. The physics of the Craton haven't changed. The only thing that has changed is how much we have built on top of the gun. The fault did not become more dangerous. The world above it simply became more fragile. In the winter of 1811, when the earth began to ripple, the lower Mississippi Valley was a wilderness. The census of 1,810 counted fewer than 1,000 residents in the settlement of New Madrid. There were no skyscrapers, no interstate highways, and no pressurized gas lines. When the ground liquefied, it swallowed trees and canoes. It was a geological event, not a human catastrophe. Today, that same patch of Earth supports over 10 million lives. This is the central anomaly of the New Madrid risk. The fault has not grown more powerful, but the target has grown infinitely larger and more brittle. Between 1950 and 1990, the Mid-South experienced a massive construction boom. We built schools, hospitals, and apartment complexes during an era of seismic amnesia. In California, every brick and beam is governed by the memory of 1906. In the Midwest, we built as if the ground were a static, eternal foundation. Memphis, Tennessee, is the heart of this vulnerability. The city sits on a deep layer of alluvial sediment, soft, water-saturated silt, deposited by the river over eons. To a seismologist, this isn't land. It's a magnifying glass for seismic waves. When the New Madrid Fault exhales, this soft soil will amplify the shaking, turning a standard tremor into a violent, churning motion that the city's historic brick architecture was never designed to endure. If you walk through the historic downtowns of St. Louis or Memphis, you see unreinforced masonry. To the eye, these buildings look permanent, solid, and safe. To an engineer, they are brittle failure structures. Bricks are excellent at holding weight vertically, the weight of the floors and the roof, but they have almost zero resistance to lateral forces, the side-to-side shearing of an earthquake. When the S-waves of a New Madrid event hit, these walls don't bend. They shatter. In a matter of seconds, the floors lose their support and pancake, leaving no survival space for those inside. California spent billions retrofitting or demolishing these death traps decades ago. In the New Madrid zone, thousands of them are still in use, housing schools, fire stations, and thousands of families. This is the invisible disaster we talk about at Project Nightwatch. It's a risk baked into the very walls of our cities, ignored because the catastrophe hasn't happened within living memory. The danger isn't just local, it's systemic. The New Madrid Seismic Zone sits directly beneath the most critical logistics artery in North America, Consider the Hernando de Soto Bridge. Every single day, tens of thousands of trucks carry the nation's freight across this span. If a major New Madrid event strikes, engineering models suggest that many of the bridges crossing the Mississippi structures built before modern seismic standards could sustain unrecoverable damage. If those bridges fail, the United States is effectively severed in two, but the compounding anomaly goes deeper. Memphis is home to the FedEx World Hub, the second busiest cargo airport on the planet. This facility is the heartbeat of the global, just-in-time delivery system. If the runways are torn by liquefaction, if the sorting facilities collapse, the ripple effect will be felt from Wall Street to the pharmacies in small-town Maine. Medicines, critical machine parts, and electronics will simply stop moving. Then, look beneath the surface. Crossing this fault zone are the major natural gas pipelines that heat the eastern seaboard. These lines are buried in the same alluvial soil that is prone to liquefaction. A rupture doesn't just mean a loss of heat. In an earthquake zone, a ruptured gas main is a massive, uncontrollable blowtorch. And with the water mains likely shattered by the same ground movement, the fire departments will find themselves standing over a disaster they cannot fight. This is the anatomy of chaos, a geological event triggering an infrastructure failure, which in turn triggers an economic collapse. We aren't just waiting for the Earth to move. We are waiting to see if our interconnected, modern world can survive a 19th century shock. And every textbook tells you the same thing. Earthquakes happen at the edges. They happen where the tectonic plates collide, grind, or tear apart. But the new Madrid Seismic Zone is a defiance of that logic. It sits nearly 1,000 miles from the nearest plate boundary. It is an intraplate anomaly, a ghost in a machine that is supposed to be solid, stable, and silent. For decades, geologists have struggled to answer a single haunting question: why here? The answer lies 550 million years ago, in an era before the first dinosaur walked the Earth. At that time, the North American continent attempted to tear itself apart in a process called continental rifting. It was a violent, structural failure that nearly created a new ocean. But for reasons we still don't fully understand, the process stopped. The rift failed. It left behind a jagged, deep crustal wound known as the Reelfoot Rift. Today, that ancient scar is buried under miles of sediment, but it remains a permanent zone of weakness. Think of the North American plate as a giant sheet of ice being pushed from the edges by the spreading Atlantic Ocean. When you push on a sheet of ice, the cracks don't start at the edges, they find the old, pre-existing fractures in the center. The New Madrid isn't a new threat. It is an ancient wound being reopened by the relentless pressure of a planet that never stops moving. This is where the story takes an unsettling turn into scientific uncertainty. In the last 20 years, a fierce debate has divided the seismological community, and the outcome of this argument will dictate the fate of 10 million people. On one side, researchers like Seth Stein have pointed to GPS data. Their instruments, sensitive enough to detect the movement of a fingernail's growth, show almost zero strain accumulation in the New Madrid zone. Their argument is seductive. If the ground isn't moving at the surface, the fault isn't loading. They suggest that the 1,812 events were a one-time release of ancient stress, a dying gasp of a fault that is finally going back to sleep. But on the other side is the paleoseismic record, the Earth's own diary. When geologists dig into the soil of the Mississippi Valley, they find sand blows, not just from 1,812, but from the year 1450 and the year 900. The dirt tells a story of recurrence. It tells us that this fault has a heartbeat, one that thumps every 500 years with devastating precision. The danger is that we are using a few decades of GPS data to try and understand a geological cycle that operates on a scale of millennia. We are trying to judge the silence of a giant by listening for a single heartbeat. At Project Nightwatch, we call this false stability. A system that appears quiet is often a system that is simply locked, holding back an ocean of energy until the friction finally gives way. The most alarming part of this story isn't the science, it's the institutional inertia. The risk is not a secret. FEMA has the models. The USGS has the maps. It is all public record. But this is what we call passive transparency. The government isn't hiding the danger. They are simply making it available in a way that no one is forced to act on. Why? Because the cost of being right is too high for the current political cycle. To truly prepare Memphis or St. Louis for a new Madrid event would require hundreds of billions of dollars in retrofitting, a complete overhaul of the insurance industry, and a fundamental shift in how we build our cities. So, we wait. We choose to interpret the scientific debate as a reason for inaction. We choose to believe the dying fault theory because it's cheaper than the alternative. But as every prepper knows, nature does not negotiate based on your budget. The 1,812 fault is still there. The Craton is still rigid. The bridges are still brittle. We are currently living in the silent gap, the window of time between the last disaster and the next one. And the longer the silence lasts, the more we convince ourselves that it will last forever. The greatest threat to America isn't the fault itself. It's the comfort we've found in its silence. To understand how far we have fallen behind, we must look across the Pacific. Japan is a nation forged in the fires of plate tectonics. It sits at the violent convergence of 4 plates, where the Big One is not a possibility, but a certainty. In Japan, seismic preparedness is not a government program. It is a cultural identity. From kindergarten, children practice the drop, cover, and hold on drill until it is as instinctual as breathing. Their buildings are not just structures. They are masterpieces of engineering designed to dance with the Earth's vibrations. When the magnitude 9 Tohoku event struck in 2011, it was a civilizational catastrophe. Yet Japan's strict building codes saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Their Shake Alert system, a network of thousands of sensors, can stop high-speed trains and shut down gas lines in the seconds before the damaging waves arrive. Now, look back at the American Midwest. We have no such integrated cultural memory. The Great Central U.S. Shakeout exists as an annual drill, but it lacks the weight of lived experience. In Japan, the landscape, the mountains, the volcanic peaks, the rugged coastlines is a constant reminder of the power below. In the new Madrid zone, the landscape is deceptive. It is flat, fertile farmland and quiet river towns. The visible geography offers no warning, and because of that, the dread gap remains wide. We are a society that prepares for the disaster we saw last year, not the one that happened 2 centuries ago. As we at Plasma Pulse often emphasize, the most dangerous anomalies are the ones that allow us to remain complacent. The dying fault hypothesis is the ultimate sedative. It provides a scientifically legitimate excuse for institutional inertia. But in the logic of disaster preparedness, we must analyze the asymmetry of consequences. If the optimists are right and we spend billions to reinforce the Mississippi bridges and retrofit the schools of St. Louis, and the earthquake never comes, we have wasted money on safety. We have built a more resilient infrastructure for a ghost. But if the paleoseismic records are right, if the 500-year heartbeat of the new Madrid is still thumping and we do nothing, we lose the logistics backbone of the United States. We lose the FedEx hub. We lose the pipelines. We lose a generation of people in brittle brick buildings. The cost of being wrong about the new Madrid is so catastrophically high that the debate itself becomes irrelevant. You do not wait to see if a gun is loaded when it is pointed at the heart of your economy. Tonight, the bridges over the Mississippi are still standing. The hospitals in Memphis are still lit, and the cargo planes are still landing on schedule, carrying the world's commerce. Millions of families are sleeping inside homes that have never been tested by the kind of violence the Earth is capable of. The new Madrid fault doesn't need to make a sound to remain a present danger. It doesn't need a movie trailer or a headline. It simply needs time. It is a clock with no hands. We know it is running. We know the spring is wound tight, but we have no way of knowing when the strike will come. The silence of the Midwest is not a sign of peace. It is the silence of a system in tension. It is the silence of an ancient wound waiting to reopen. And perhaps that is the ultimate warning. Not the shaking, not the collapse, not the sirens after midnight, but the silence that lasted so long, we mistook it for safety. At Plasma Pulse, we do not look away. We monitor the anomalies so that when the ground finally decides to speak, we aren't among those who claim they weren't warned. Tell us, the last time the ground shook near you, did you feel ready? Or did you realize, in that split second, how fragile the world above really is? While the data in the vaults of the USGS is screaming, the streets above remain whispers of unconcerned normalcy. This is the human anomaly. In our investigation at Project Nightwatch, we've found that risk is not just a matter of physics, it is a matter of perception. If you ask a resident of Memphis about a tornado, they will show you their storm cellar. They know the sirens, the seasonal patterns, and the drill. But ask them about the new Madrid Seismic Zone, and you encounter a hollow silence. Surveys conducted by disaster researchers in the Mid-South reveal a startling reality. The majority of residents are unaware. They live in one of the most dangerous seismic zones in the Northern Hemisphere. This isn't because they are unintelligent. It's because the risk is socially invisible. Unlike a hurricane that you can track on a satellite for a week, or a tornado that announces itself with a roar, the new Madrid fault provides no seasonal reminder. It is a threat without a narrative. And in the absence of a story, the human mind defaults to the most dangerous assumption possible, that the future will always look exactly like the recent past. Why do we ignore a gun pointed at us simply because it hasn't fired in 2 centuries? Psychologists call this temporal discounting. Our brains are hardwired for immediate survival. The predator in the grass, the storm on the horizon. We are remarkably poor at processing threats that operate on a geological timescale. Furthermore, the new Madrid lacks a visual anchor. In California, you can stand on a ridge and see the San Andreas Fault carving its way through the mountains. It is a physical scar that demands respect. But in the Mississippi Valley, the danger is buried under hundreds of feet of soft, flat, deceptive river silt. There is no mountain range to remind you of the tension. There is only farmland and urban sprawl. This lack of a visual threat creates a dread gap. Without a visible reminder, the mind engages in motivated reasoning, the process of finding any excuse like the dying fault theory to avoid the psychological and financial cost of being prepared. We don't believe it because believing it would require us to change our lives. The awareness gap at the kitchen table is mirrored by an inertia gap in the halls of government. For a politician, preparedness is a difficult product to sell. If an elected official spends $500 million to earthquake-proof a bridge and no earthquake happens during their term, they are accused of wasting taxpayer money. If they ignore the risk and the bridge stands, they are seen as fiscally responsible. The rewards of disaster prevention are invisible. No one gets a trophy for the building that didn't collapse. Consequently, our institutions are trapped in short-term thinking. While FEMA produces catastrophic models behind closed doors, local zoning laws and building codes often lag decades behind the science. We are building 21st century infrastructure on a 19th century understanding of safety, essentially gambling that the big one won't happen until someone else is in office. Let us be clear, this is not a conspiracy. There is no secret cabal hiding the truth about New Madrid. The data is on the website. The maps are in the public library. The modeling is available for anyone to download. But this is what we call passive transparency. By burying the warning in academic language and 400-page PDF files, the system fulfills its legal obligation to inform, while ensuring that the information never actually reaches the person in the brick house on the alluvial soil. It is a failure of communication that is more dangerous than a cover-up, because a cover-up can be exposed, but a passive failure can only be corrected by a disaster. We are living in a world where the truth is public, but the belief is absent. And as the tension in the Reelfoot Rift continues to build, the gap between what we know and what we do is becoming the most dangerous fault line of all. The truth isn't buried in the fault. It's buried in our refusal to see what's right in front of us. At Plasma Pulse, we do not view the new Madrid Seismic Zone in isolation. The core of our investigation is the compounding anomaly, the terrifying reality that our planet's systems are interconnected in ways our standard models are only beginning to grasp. While the geological stress in the Reelfoot Rift builds, we must ask, what provides the final nudge? What pulls the trigger on a critically stressed fault? Emerging research into space weather and geomagnetic activity suggests a haunting link. During periods of the solar maximum, like the one we are entering in 2025 to 2026, the Earth's magnetic field is bombarded by coronal mass ejections, CMEs. These solar storms don't just dance as auroras, they induce massive electrical currents in the Earth's crust. For a fault system like New Madrid buried in the rigid, conductive tuning fork of the American Craton, these geomagnetic induced currents may act as a microscopic lubricant or a sudden pulse of thermal stress. We are tracking a correlation between peak solar activity and intraplate seismic unrest. It is the ultimate compounding nightmare, a sun-driven pulse triggering a continental-scale rupture. If the New Madrid breaks, the shaking is only the beginning of the invisible disaster. We must look at the fragility of the digital grid. The central United States is a graveyard of buried high-pressure natural gas pipelines and fiber optic backbones. These are the nervous system and circulatory system of the nation. In the 1800s, there were no SCADA systems to fail, no transformers to explode, and no satellite-dependent logistics. A major rupture today would trigger a cascading failure that the modern world is not prepared to reboot. When the alluvial soil liquefies, it won't just tilt buildings. It will sever the pipelines that heat the Northeast and power the Eastern interconnection. Within hours, a geological event in a Missouri cornfield becomes an energy crisis in Manhattan and a communications blackout in Florida. We are living in a just-in-time civilization that has zero latency for a geological shock. At Project Nightwatch, we analyze the data not to scare, but to prepare for the moment the backbone of America snaps, leaving 100 million people in a digital dark age. The story of the New Madrid is the story of our time, an era where the old rules of stability no longer apply. We are entering the age of the compounding anomaly, where record-breaking floods load the crust with billions of tons of water weight, while solar flares agitate the magnetic field, all while a silent fault waits to settle an ancient debt. This is the Nightwatch Directive. Information is the only true shield. The institutions may stay silent to avoid market panics, and the public may stay distracted by the noise of the day. But the anomalies are speaking to those who know how to listen. Preparedness is not about fear. It is about reclaiming agency in a world that is shifting beneath our feet. We do not wait for the government to announce the emergency. We watch the indicators. We strengthen our local loops. We internalize the reality that the silence of the rift is an invitation to prepare, not an excuse to forget. The ground beneath you is a sleeping giant. Tonight, it is still. But at Plasma Pulse, we are watching the heartbeat, because the only thing more dangerous than the fault is the belief that it will sleep forever.